All right. It's nice of them to bring my chairs all the way from my home in Brooklyn.
They're on hire from
comfy.
ABC. They really are.
Fantastic. That way they return them after.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into craft, work, process, all that kind of stuff, but maybe we'll start with your early years, where you grew up in New Jersey. No, that's not right.
The fact that gets a laugh is good.
Yeah. So,
As if there was anybody who had like doubts about where I'm from.
They were like, really?
Yeah.
That's what that accent is?
Yeah.
So where are you from?
I'm from Dublin in Ireland, and yeah, that's where I'm from.
Yeah, great. Did you have any siblings? Or do you have siblings?
Yes, I came from a small Irish family. There's 6 of us. And there was a woman actually who lived down the road who had 18 children.
18?
And one of them was Christy Brown, the writer. He was like number 14. Sorry, I don't need to turn my back on anybody here. He was number 15, and he was born, he was born severely physically disabled. And the only part of his body that he could move was his foot, and he learned to paint and write with his foot. And they made a movie of that called My Left Foot. And I remember seeing him around the streets where we lived, and he was regarded as a write-off, and he became a brilliant writer and also an exceptional painter. So all the families around were large Irish families.
So 6 was on the lower end.
6 was, you know.
And you were the eldest of?
I was the eldest
siblings?
of 6, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
What did your parents do for a
My
living?
father was a labourer in the Guinness brewery, who, at the age of 50, was made redundant. They were all just fired. He worked in a particular trade, which is now more or less obsolete, called the Cooper trade, which is the wooden barrels that they put beer in. And then they went into metal casks, and all those men who had learned those trades and used those really amazing tools and words they were all obsolete. So my father became redundant at 50, and my mother went out to work as a nurse. And
How old were you at that time?
I was quite young. But I never understood what redundancy and unemployment actually meant to a person's identity. And it's something that in our business we come across, you know, quite frequently, or so in some cases infrequently, but the notion that you have long periods where you're not working. And my father's identity was his job. So when his job was taken away, also his identity was taken from him. And there was a sense that if you were unemployed, there was a palpable sense in the community, I think, he certainly felt it, of shame. That if you don't have a job, you don't have an identity, and therefore you don't have your standing as a man, if you like. So when I came later on to the acting business, and I'm sure you've found the same thing, we have long periods of unemployment where you're forced. I've always said that the easiest part of acting, in a way, is the acting, the doing of the thing. Do you know what I mean? Because you have to do it, whether you do it well or not. But when you're not working, when you don't have a job to go to, you really are forced into an area where you think, well, who am I outside my job? Yeah. And it's a question that everybody, I think, at some stage asks themselves, like, how much of my job is my identity? And acting is a strange kind of profession, as you know, because there's the inner identity that you have as a human being. And then success in acting, or even lack of success in acting, imposes a separate identity on top of that. Because you know, it's not that success as an actor, I'm talking about success now in the sense that if you're working as an actor, I don't mean mega famous, but another identity is imposed on you. And sometimes people have a problem identifying the character that the person plays with the person that they are. It often happens in long-running kind of drama series on television and so forth. So that question of identity, I think, is at the root of what it means to be an actor. And people have, I think, and I think you've probably come to notice that they have a weird perception of what the actor does. And a lot of directors, as we were saying earlier on, don't really understand the process of acting. But I think that when you set out to find a character, what you're trying to do is find some kind of connection between you and this character. Yeah. And the delusion I think that a lot of actors suffer from is that they become somebody else. You don't actually become anybody else. You become more of yourself in a way.
Well, this was a question that I actually wanted to ask you about, because it seems to me in the roles that you play that there's you have such a, in my college we called it a spine, or like a point of view that we see it in your performance. So do you find a character, do you think it's necessary to understand their point of view, or do you bring your own point of view to the character that you're going to be playing?
That's a really interesting question, because I find it's a very complex question. Like, let's say you take a play, and let's say you take a play by O'Neill or Shakespeare, and they've written a particular character. What is that character on the page? Mm-hmm. What was it in Eugene O'Neill's head? I mean, Eugene O'Neill famously wrote about his family, and he made that family out of his own honesty and truth. He made that family universal as a great dramatist. So we can all identify with that dysfunctional, tortured kind of family. But they're just words on a page that came out of his head onto a page. Now, what happens to those words? If an actor doesn't enact them, they become just a thing that you read. What the actor does is he brings life to those words. But what is the significance of that life? What does it mean? It means that you bring yourself to it. You bring things that you mightn't even want to tell your best friend to it. Like, you have to go, especially with O'Neill, you have to go, and I don't want to make any claims for myself in this, but I'm talking about what I would ideally love to do. You have to be absolutely careless of what other people think about you. And yet it's a job that's criticized.
Right.
You go in with a performance, and like, everybody who's paid $10 can say, I didn't like that. And that's it. But you have to bring the things that you're almost afraid to admit to other people to the role.
Can I jump back a little earlier in your career? I think I was looking at your book, Pictures in My Head, and you told a story about, I think it was your first job in television. Do you remember, I think it was a one-line part where it was like, "Right this way, sir," or something like that. And do you remember this story about, and what you brought to that character? And maybe that might...
How do you bring life to one line?
Yeah.
I was working in the theater, and it was who was the woman that was discovered in the chemist shop in Hollywood?
In the what?
In the drugstore. What was her name?
Lana Turner, thank you.
Lana Turner. She was sitting at the counter, and somebody came in and said, "Oh, she'd be good in a movie." Well, that happened to me.
Right, so the Focus Theater.
Yeah, I was sitting at a counter having a drink, and this guy passed by, and he noticed my leather jacket, and he said, I was working a little bit in theater, and he said, "Do you want to come out and audition for this part?" So I auditioned for it, and I had one line to say I was cast as a priest, and they gave me this collar that was way too big for me. And I learned the first thing about acting: always be comfortable in your costume, because this thing felt like a big basin that I was looking out of, and the trousers were too big. and the sleeves came down here. So it was like, and I thought, well, I'm going to make this line mean something. And all I had to say was, I had to open the door and usher this woman in and say, this way, please. So I went into my little room at home and I was saying, this way, please. Well, there's only one way she's going in, so it can't be that way. So, this way, please. Well, it is a way. So, this way, please. That sounds too ingratiating. So, this way, please. More authoritative. This way, please. To priest, bass, and so I was so nervous.
Did you give him a limp too?
Oh yeah, I did. I decided, what can you do with one line? I said, okay, well, give him a limp. And during the rehearsal, I was walking across the floor, and I was limping, you know, and I was waiting forever for my line to come on. I go, come on. Yeah, okay. And then I come on, and the director said, stop for a second. He said, what's wrong? Is there something wrong with your foot? And I said, no, well, that's the character. He said, what do you mean it's the character? I said, well, he's got a limp. He said, the character has no limp. He's just saying this way, please. He's no limp. And what's that accent that you're using? I said, well, he's not from any part of Ireland. He's just a guy opening the door with no limp, saying, this way, please. And because I had been brought up on, you know, the method and, you know, guys living the thing and,
Right.
you know, you got to be like tortured and you really got to know your character. And so by making decisions about his limp and the accent that he's from and the kind of way that he walked and everything, it was all irrelevant.
Right.
And so
it's actually distancing to the character rather than making.
Well, there was no character.
There isn't a character. Right. Yeah.
You know, I wasn't playing
was a
Hamlet.
line.
You know, maybe it was a line. And all I was a way of, they could have done without me. The guy in the other room could have said, come in, and she could have walked through the door. But in my mind, it was a big break for me because it was like, maybe there's some guy out there saying, hey, the guy who said this way, please. Okay, can we get him in? Because he was just that limp and that thing with that guy. Anyway, on the take, I'd never worked in front of a television camera before. I didn't even know you had to have makeup on. And I thought that they put a camera down, you did it once, and everybody went home. And so they counted me down and they said, okay, on the count of 10, you walk to the door, say your line, and, you know, so 10, 9, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why isn't the door open? Oh, Jesus Christ. I was so nervous, I forgot to go to the door.
Yeah.
So they went for take 2. And I got so discombobulated then, I wheeled around and banged into a statue of the Blessed Virgin, which splintered in 1,000 pieces on the floor. And the statue had been rented from the nuns. And they were all like in... And I learned something very important from that. You know, don't overthink the role.
Don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so at that time you were doing a lot of theater.
Yeah.
How did that come? You talked about, was it Deirdre O'Connell?
Yeah.
Who basically came in, and you said that she taught you everything that you knew or know about acting, or at least at that time, that she was like your first teacher, mentor into that world.
Yeah, she taught me really basic things. Like if you stand with your back to an audience, they're not going to see your face.
Good, yeah. Right. You needed to be taught that.
Yeah, because you come out like an idiot and you stand and you say,
you face the person you're talking to.
Yeah, and you say, the coach is here.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, like if you want to milk it, you know, you'll say, the coach is here. I'm not saying you do it like that, but you milk it a bit. But anyway, she said to me, listen, you're supposed to be gone to Moscow in this play, and you come back unexpectedly. We do not want to hear you in the wings going, so that we know you're coming on before you, simple things. Listen to the person that's talking to you. Don't be waiting for their mouth to close so that you say your line. Really listen to them. And listening on stage is very difficult.
Yeah. And
I'm going to ask you if you find listening in a role on stage as opposed to, say, listening to an actor. Say, it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say about working with Spielberg as opposed to, say, being on stage. Do you find that particular process of really listening, especially if you go on, say you're doing the same play and it's 2 months later, how do you find that that is new for you every night?
Yeah, I think you just get better at faking it, maybe, after doing it over and over again. There's something with, well, we were talking about this before, about the lack of rehearsal process in TV and film. And so maybe but in a way that almost makes it harder to listen because you don't want to, at least for me, I'm thinking, when do I come in? It is that, like, I don't know this as well. Whereas in a play, you get so much repetition with it, you learn the ins and outs of the moment so that you start to learn ways of maybe tricking, like I'll start scratching this chair so that when that line got my attention, it's like tricking my own body, my own self, even though that's completely fabricated. I find the lie fools even me. In a way.
I also think that the actor's brain in live performance, say on stage, is a fragmented thing. Like on the one hand, you're thinking, what's my next line? On the other hand, you have to feel the emotion of the moment that you're feeling. You may be asked to go over there and take a glass. So there's a part of your brain saying, this is the line, there's a pause here, I've got to get the glass here, and this line is going to make the audience gasp or cry or whatever. Then you're also thinking about things like, whether you like it or not, a version of did I leave the kettle on?
Right. Like, because you are dealing with like point A to the entire arc to point B. Right. As opposed to in film when it's fragmented.
Well, you have 30 seconds or a minute on tape or on film where a director's saying action.
Yeah.
And then at the best times, and if it works on stage, it's beautiful too. It's almost like an invisible bubble comes down over you. And you operate within that bubble. And the only thing that might disturb you would be a phone going off.
In the front row. I mean, I guess there are benefits, and each of them have their good and their bad, but yeah, what do you enjoy the arc of, like, getting to an evening of theater? You're telling this story, I mean, a traditional play or something where it's told from beginning to end. I mean, is that something that is that a conscious difference to you, that it makes it unique in the performing of it, not from the audience?
I know this sounds probably heretical to say, but I don't actually enjoy it.
Performing live?
No, I don't enjoy really in the sense that you're so... I don't enjoy the process of acting. I love the anticipation of it. And I think also that you're not you can rarely judge yourself. Sometimes when you think you've done well, you've done awful. Sometimes you're awful, it's good. But I rarely enjoy being in the process of it, because it's just
nerve-wracking?
It is nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, it is a series of lies that are designed to tell the truth. And that's like a paradox. But are you really telling the truth? You're trying to. And that's why I hate watching stuff that I've done. I don't know how you feel about it, but for many actors, they don't even know how they get there. Because again, it goes back to that question of identity. Because is this thing that you've presented, thanks to the writer, you, or is it not you? There was a great story told about Laurence Olivier when he was doing a play at Stratford. And they were about 6 weeks into the play, and one night, the people behind stage recognized that Olivier was given a performance that was transcendent. And the dressers and the makeup people and the other actors came to the side of the stage to watch him and to watch this guy who had taken kind of leave of the stage and was gone into this other place. And the audience knew it too. And when the performance ended, they erupted as one, you know, with standing ovations. And Olivier stormed off the stage and pushed his way through all the people who were in the wings applauding him and just looking at him with, you know, a sense of awe. And so he went into his dressing room and he slammed the door. And the story was that one of the guys went and knocked on the door, his dresser, and tiptoed into the room, and Olivier was furiously taking off his makeup and throwing the things into the basin. And the guy tentatively said to him, Sir Lawrence, I have to say that performance tonight was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen on the stage. And Olivier said, I know. And the guy said to him, but why are you so angry? And he said, because I don't know how I did it.
Right.
And it's you know, it's such a truthful story because I don't know, maybe you have a perspective on this, but I don't know how it's done. And when you're saying the scratching of the thing, I know what you mean by that, because that is a kind of a lie. But it's a lie that allows the audience to think that you're thinking about something else.
Right.
But to me, it's a complex. Here's the thing: if you go into a playground or you watch kids playing, they play in the most unselfconscious way. I'm the doctor, you're the patient. Or I'm the daddy, you're the mommy. It's time to go to bed now, they say to the doll. There's no artifice there. They are being that. And I'm not equating acting with being like a child, but somebody said that the goal of the artist, and they were talking about Picasso, because Picasso had said that his ambition in life was to learn to paint like a child, unselfconsciously to do it. And I suppose that the ambition of an actor would be to act like a child, to be so unselfconsciously in the moment that you're unaware of whether you left the kettle on or not.
Right. Do you find that you have to have some sort of craft in order, or what is the process before, at least in my experience, in order to get to the being like a child on stage and not thinking about the kettle? You kind of have to make the tea first. You know, you have to have already done all the stuff previously.
Well, honestly, I've never gotten to that stage. That's why I hate seeing movies that I've done, because I always look at it and say, oh, God, that's not what I meant. You know, and it's good about a stage performance because you don't see it.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, when you do a movie, the difference between being in an audience watching a play is that what's happening in front of you at the moment is absolutely happening in this moment. And you have an unconscious, unarticulated acknowledgement of that. And when you go into a cinema, you know that that has been done a year ago. And it cannot be changed. But there's always the possibility in a live performance that you'll drop the glass in the middle of a scene, or you'll forget the line, or whatever. But when a movie is a success and there's an expectation of a film, like for example, if you're doing the Spielberg movie, it's not just the same as saying, well, I did a movie with this bloke in Idaho, and you know,
No, it's
this is Spielberg, and people are saying, wow, you're in the Spielberg movie. I'd love to hear what your experience was like, you know, working with him, and predominantly as a stage actor coming to a huge, I mean, Spielberg is, you know,
He's up there.
he's the one director that you know by his second name. You know, he's a bit like Sting, or you know, he has Madonna. He's one name. You know,
Right.
Spielberg.
Yeah.
So you get the job. Did you go in and audition for it?
Yes, I did.
And what was that process like?
Well, I only auditioned. It was one audition with the casting director, Ellen Lewis, who, do you know?
I do know Ellen,
she's
yeah.
Wonderful, and
Yeah.
has sort of had been championing for me for a while there. She brought me in for, it was 2 parts, I think. The sides weren't necessarily going to be in the movie. Put me on tape, and then I got a call about 2 weeks later saying that he saw my tape, Spielberg, and liked it, that there was something to it that he hadn't seen other people in, and we'll find out more stuff later. And then that was great.
Did you feel that you had done well at the audition?
I thought I did. It was funny. I was doing a workshop of a new play that week, and so it was a situation where I had a lunch break for like probably an hour, where I had to run off, go to this audition way downtown, of course, when we were rehearsing uptown for the play, and do that, you know, very quickly, and then rush back. Probably sometimes the best work is done when you can't overthink it too much.
Sure.
And yeah, so I thought it went well. She was, at the end of it, Ellen was like, "I'm gonna find something for you eventually," and and then, so I mean, that you could take that a couple different ways, but it was nice, and I was like, all right, on to the next, and then yeah, I went back to rehearsal. A couple weeks later, I got the call that he liked it, and then it was 2 weeks after that, I think, when I got the call. So it was just the one audition. Didn't meet him until I got on set in Berlin to shoot it.
Do you feel that audition will change your life? Your acting career, I mean?
I mean, it did. I have yet to, you know, how much or little is yet to be seen, I guess. I mean, I think just by the nature of that on a resume opens doors. And I mean, kind of something I'm joking about now is like, I think I'm actually going to get to do theater again because I'm in a big film. Yeah.
Can I ask you what your ambition for your career is? Or do you think like that? Because a lot of young actors now, I notice, have a worked out trajectory where, you know, they're working in theater and the next minute they've got managers and lawyers and agents and publicists and all that.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily my style. I love my agents and my manager, who I got through a theater play. I don't have it worked out. Doing more, I guess. You know, the goal is to be solely employed or support myself doing acting, which is a question I wanted to ask you about. How on your IMDb page, it pretty much seems like you started working nonstop when you. Since the late 70s, maybe jumping back, if there's time we can talk more about my career. But I mean, did you have, because you were doing theater and then you started auditioning for TV and film, I guess, and you got on the TV show The Reardons? Mm-hmm. Was that a goal of yours?
No, at that time, there was no film industry in Ireland. Mm-hmm. There was no television. There was one channel. and everybody watched it on a Sunday night and a Saturday night, and there was a soap opera on there. And to me, that was the zenith of what you could achieve as an actor, and I never thought I would ever have a chance of being on that. And I did. It was my father's favorite program, and the thing I'm most proud of is that before he died, he got to see me sitting with him in the room and watching me on television. It was the most surreal experience I think he'd ever had in his life.
Well, because backstage you said that when you told him you were going to be an actor, that he told his friends that his son went to go join the circus.
Yeah.
Is the way he saw it.
Yeah, he said it rather mournfully, as if, he had expected greater things of me, but I'd actually joined the circus. But for him, that's what the entertainment business was. Nobody had any concept of, I used to go to the films as a kid, and I lived in the cinema. And then I got interested in theater when I was in my teenage years. But first of all, I never expected I'd even come to America. Never mind be in theater or films or anything like that. So it's been the most unexpected surprise to me in my life,
Yeah. I guess that's the way I would like to see mine. To be fortunate enough to keep having work come. And so answering that question of, in those down times, how do you find yourself when you're going from, when there's the inevitable end of a job, and have there been long periods for you since the early 80s, or have you kind of known what was coming next?
No. When I went to London first, I was out of work for 18 months.
Yeah.
That's a long time to try and justify getting up every morning and saying you're an actor. And eventually I stopped telling people I was an actor, because they'd say, well, what have I seen you in? And you'd say, well, really, nothing. So
it's one of those jobs where it's hard to claim unless, how do you claim it without a resume to show for it?
True. And people's definition of what success is and what failure is can be something that affects the way you look at your job. What is the definition of success? Is success making movies and getting millions and millions of dollars? Is success forcing yourself to do plays that really test you, and you're not going to get the reward of millions of dollars? Is success about how you live your life as opposed to how you manage your career? And is career more important than life? And there is a time when you're young and you're a young actor where you really truly believe that career is more important than life. And I think that one of the things that I've slowly come to terms with, slowly I say, as I've gotten older, is to realize that yes, life is infinitely more important than a career. But that's not to say that the career isn't important. And in those moments when you're not working, I'm prey, I know this, and I know my wife would say the same thing about me, is that I'm prey to all the insecurities. And am I any good? Will I ever work again? I got really bad reviews for all that, all those things. I'm getting older. Are there any roles for men of my age? And the thing about, if you work in film or television, if I look back, and sometimes you see this, you're in a hotel. This is a surreal experience. I woke up one night in a hotel room in Berlin, jet lagged, and I turned on the television. And I always remember there was a row of chocolate papers from the minibar over to the bed, and I thought, oh no, I've attacked the minibar. And on television was a movie I made many, many, many years ago. And I looked at my younger self, and I thought, wow, film and television has a way of marking your age in a really forceful way. And you hear people, I think that women will understand this more than men, but I think that it's something that actors get used to hearing. Actresses more than actors, but people are really cruel about the aging process in movies, really cruel. And I remember when Robert Redford did a movie called Havana. He was 49 at the time. And I remember not really understanding what the thrust of these reviews were, but they were about how old he'd gotten. He was 49. And I thought to myself, wow, 49, but that's ancient, I thought. 49 is ancient. And then you realize that a lot of the fire that you have inside you is still there, but that people are beginning to perceive you in a different way. I mean, it's the process of growing older. That's what it is. It's the process of aging. And what you have to do, it seems to me, I'm finding this out about my own life, is letting go.
Right.
It's very, very difficult to let go. So let's say you have been a very successful film actor and you're known for your roles as a heroic actor. I'm thinking of actors who look like grotesque parodies of what they used to be. And I think, wow, that must be so tough to think that you were a gigantic movie star in the 70s. I remember sitting beside an actor, I don't want to give his name, but everybody knows who he is. And he sat beside me in a chair and he started to cry. And he said to me, I made billions for those studios. And now look at me, I can't get a job. At least a job that's any use. And you mark things like that.
Yeah.
Because letting go, accepting, is for me, maybe one of the most difficult battles that you can wage. And that goes from the very beginning of a career, where your definition of success and failure has to be about letting go the result. So you go on stage and you say, I'll do the best I can. And after that, it's not my business. But of course you're an insecure human being. And if somebody comes up to you in the street and says, I saw that crappy movie you were in. Whew. What did you do
And
that
people
for?
do that.
People do that. People are quite cruel, yeah.
Wow.
But people are intensely complimentary too.
Right.
People will be, I remember when I did In Treatment, I never knew there were so many psychotherapists in New York.
Right, yeah.
They were everywhere. You go into Pan Quotidien for a coffee and there was 4 of them there going, you know.
My girlfriend's a psychotherapist.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
here right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, well, that's a job. That's a real job.
I should have let you finish the story before I revealed that.
That's a real job. But I did, when I was doing that series, and if for people who didn't see it, I played a therapist. And I reached quite a low point in my life in winter time, and life seemed very bleak and dark, and as it sometimes does, you know. And I decided, enough, I'm going to go to therapy. Because brought up as a Catholic, therapy was, you know, it wasn't confession.
Right.
Confession is where you get everything forgiven. Therapy, you have to spend a fortune and you're there years later. Confession, you go in, they say 3 Hail Marys, off you go. But
Right.
anyway, I went to see this therapist and he opened the door. And he had been watching me the night before on television, and he was looking at me. And he was saying, what? And I couldn't get through with this guy.
Wow.
He'd say, so tell me about your thing. And I'd give him the answer. And he'd be staring at me going, what's this guy doing in the chair? You know, because he couldn't reconcile this guy that he'd seen on television with this guy who was sitting in front of him. But going back to what success and failure is, if I could really truly believe that success was about pleasing myself rather than pleasing other people, that's a big victory over yourself. And if I believe that failure was actually a really good thing, and that you have to fail in order to grow, because if you stand with your back to the audience and you don't show your face, you learn the next time that you have to face the audience. And so you learn from failure much more than you learn from success.
Right.
Because failure teaches you that you're not perfect. And failure teaches that you've got work to do. And it teaches you that there is no top of the mountain. There's the climbing of the mountain. and there's maybe planting your flag for a couple of minutes, but then you come back down the mountain to go up a higher mountain. So
is that a reason to keep coming back to theater, to live stage? If you don't find it satisfying necessarily while you're doing it or enjoyable, what is it that brings you back? Is it the material itself, like O'Neill?
it's partly that, but it's partly the wish that maybe this time you'll get it right. That this time you will actually get to where you want to get. And you will be able to face the possibility of criticism. Because when you stand on a stage and a critic comes in and he's making notes in the dark, and the paper comes out the next day and it says, this actor was miscast.
Has it happened to you?
They never said miscast, but they did say things that made me go in the depths of myself to say that's true. Like if somebody says to you, you're really beautiful or you're really handsome, and you think, well, I don't know, and then somebody comes along and says, you're actually not really handsome at all. You have a broken nose and whatever. If they tap into what your deepest fear is about yourself, which are you going to believe? You're going to be drawn to believe the thing that you least want to face.
Right.
And the bravest thing an actor can do is not the first night, but the second night to come back out and face an audience, knowing that you've been critically, mauled in a thing. And you know that everybody out there knows that. That requires such courage to do that.
Do you read the reviews when they come out?
You don't have to read them.
No, you don't.
You don't have to read them because people let you know it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right.
And if the reviews are really great, people are going, they're on the phone the next morning. Wow, that thing in the New York Times, fantastic. Oh, she's that Ben Brandt. Oh. Or, it's 12:15. Nobody's called.
Right, yeah. You don't hear anything.
So it's the silence is the thing that tells you. And
or it's, if you have my mom, she's like, I disagree with that review. I'm like, oh, great. Thanks, Mom.
yeah, your mother will always tell you the truth. You know.
It's a thing, you believe the
Your
review
mother,
rather than...
But I think that's true of life too, because we're all so afraid to be judged and criticized, and it's so hard to stand there and say, judge me, criticize me, it's okay, because I'm okay with myself. What makes it courageous is to say, you're probably right, but I'm going to get up off the canvas again and see if I can do it right the next time. To me, that's courage or insanity.
Or I think you called it an addiction to acting.
An addiction, yes. Probably an addiction, yeah.
It is interesting. It's something where it's like that toothache that you keep like pushing on or something. It is a little...
The thing is, could you give it up? Could you walk away from it and say, I'll never do this again? I often think of, say, great footballers. And I have a friend who used to play for the New York Jets. And I've talked to him about this, where he played on one of the great teams. And he talks about the last Saturday that he walked off, where there was 80,000 people chanting, his name. And the following Saturday, he was at home flicking channels on the television. How do you let go of that? It goes back to the same thing again, of letting go of expectation, accepting reality is
and
so difficult.
Our own limitations.
Our own limitations. You know what? It's okay to be that. But accepting that you're not perfect, accepting that it's okay to fail, accepting that you're probably never going to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. Accepting that, I still find that a major battle. And O'Neill writes beautifully about this thing. He talks about in one of his letters in relation to A Touch of the Poet, which I did some years ago. Very, very, very difficult play, in my opinion. He talks about the purpose of his function as a playwright is to remove the mask of behavior from characters. And he talks about how, as people, we are all haunted, he says haunted, by the masks that we wear and the masks that other people wear. So we are a great deal of the time in relation to other people acting with masks. That person has a mask and you have a mask. And sometimes the mask is taken off. People get angry, or it's road rage or something, and the masks are gone, and people go, oh, the mask has been taken off. And when that mask is taken off, he was talking about reality. He was talking about being absolutely real. And that's what he demands of those characters in those plays, to be absolutely unmasked. Because that's what happens. If you look at the character arc in O'Neill's plays, they begin as one thing, and they end completely naked, looking at each other saying, I know who you are, and you know who I am. And the audience is saying, we know who you are, and we're that too. You know, that's his great power as a playwright, yeah.
So you're staying on track with O'Neill. You're going to do Long Day's Journey into Night next spring. Do you find that to hold true for that? Is that family? It's about essentially his family. O'Neill's writing about his family. Are they holding? They're trying to hold something together throughout the play until finally at the end, like the lies about whatever they're stealing their father's alcohol. They're, you know, these things about keeping up appearances. The mother's taking drugs until it just becomes too much, and they have to lay all the cards out on the table.
Well, I think what drama allows you to do, what movies allow you to do, is that they can go by proxy into a situation that perhaps you may never be allowed to do. If you think about this for a moment in relation to your own family, let's say your own family sat down and told the truth to each other. I mean, there's some families that would say, yeah, sure, yeah, no problem. But most families have secrets. And most families survive by having the mask on. It's crucial to keep the mask on in order to keep the core of the family together. So we all...
And it gets thicker and thicker, the longer and thicker.
Yeah. And what O'Neill does by the end is that he has stripped that down. And he is saying, this is what the truth is. This is what truth is. And this is what we do most of the time. Most of the time, and it's a paradox again, because what's happening on the stage is a fiction, but it's the truth. And what happens out there is we pretend it's the truth, but actually many times it's fiction. So we are all brilliant actors. Brilliant actors. Like if you meet somebody you don't like, you can be brilliant saying, hey, how are you? Wow, that's amazing. Even though you think, wow, this is a bitch. You think, how do you say to somebody who insults you or says something cruel, and you say, I'm not going to show that really hurts me? That's profound acting.
Right.
So what we do on the stage is we make up a lie, as you say, with this scratching thing, or we fool the audience into thinking we're telling the truth, but we are. But out there, we lie all the time. And we lie. Here's the thing that fascinates me too, that you can be really, really intimate with another person, and you still can say, where is the absolute honest truth here? What is intimacy? What is real intimacy? What is real truth? And that's what actors do. They say, look, here, we'll act this out for you, and you make up your mind about it. And the actor people think that the actor came into existence, 200 years ago. The most primitive societies have what they call shamans in them. The old Druids used to have people who acted out, not just plays. I mean, the Greek formalized theater, the acting out thing in a way, but people took on the sins of the tribe and acted them out. And you still see it in very kind of primitive societies. There has to be that outlet. That's what fiction is. Right. It has to give us that outlet, because otherwise we remain in that territory of the mask.
Do you think, do theater and film both serve that purpose? I mean, I guess they do for sure, but what sides of the spectrum do those two, what am I trying to ask? If it is, it's like that holding a mirror up to, to society, to who we are. Does film, is it capable of doing something that theater isn't, and vice versa, in terms of that? Or is it just different modes of the same thing?
I don't think it matters really whether it's film or theater. I think that we have an innate recognition of the truth. When we see the truth, we know it. If you're at a great play and it's really amazing and you are caught up in it, what's happening there is you're recognizing some version of truth. And we all know, we've all been to plays where is that moment that happens when an audience en masse switches off and says, this isn't working. And where is the moment where they say, wow. And the greatest applause you can get in a play, in my opinion, is the silence at the end. Before people come back to reality, because they have been transported into something else. So what you're hoping for, I mean, I never had any training in really film criticism or theater criticism or literary criticism or painting, but there's one way that is indisputable critique. And that is, does it move you? Does this move you? Are you walking out of the theater going, wow. 3 days later, you're thinking about it. 3 years later, you're thinking about it. Are you moved by it? If you see a painting and you look at it and you say, or you see a painting and you say, wow, that's incredible. How did he? You're moved.
What is it the truth aspect that does move us, do you think? Like, what makes it moving?
I think it's the truth.
Yeah.
The truth moves people. And
recognition of
the
themselves.
recognition
And whether
through lies, through a series of pretenses and lies, we recognize the truth.
Right.
That's bizarre. I never understand that. But if you look at a kid, and a kid comes up to you, and a kid says, yeah, and then I went, and then the thing happened, and then the other thing happened. And you look at them and you say, this kid is telling the truth.
Right.
You don't say, I wonder if this kid is up to something. Because you know when they're up to something. But you also know, absolutely, there's no filter on a kid, really. They're telling, a dog also doesn't lie to you. A dog tells you the truth. You look at the dog and you say, this dog is incapable of pretense. It's a fact.
Yeah.
A dog isn't pretending.
Only a dog.
Well, unless it's our dog who pretends to be hungry all the time. But that's it. What I'm saying is that we have.
But you can't not pretend to not like food. He wants food.
He wants food.
And that's what he's going to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we do. We distrust ourselves. We distrust our own incredible ability to recognize the truth. And it always seems amazing to me. Like, you'll go to a play on Broadway, and for the previews, everybody's standing up, standing ovation. Yeah, Ben Brantley comes along, and everybody's sitting down.
Right.
What's that about?
What is that about?
What it's about is that people are led by what they think is a superior criticism, instead of saying to themselves, you know what, I really love that play.
That, yeah.
And I love that movie. And I don't give a crap what so-and-so thinks about it, because in the end, it's only his opinion. So you know, the basic tenet, in my opinion, of education at school is to teach children to think for themselves and to not be ashamed of their own opinions, not feel inferior to it. And I was brought up like that. I was brought up to think that everybody else, the church, the state, the teachers, everybody knew the answer except me. Now I understand that actually I have a pretty good recognition of what's real and what's not real. And a lot of people who told me what they said was the truth were actually lying to me.
Right. Why is that? In order to make a society run, they have to keep everyone within these aisles that you walk down?
Yeah, we're lied to every single day. We turn on the news and we think, unconsciously, we've been programmed to think the news is the truth. Let's see what's on the news. I looked at the New York Post this morning, and I was standing beside a guy, and I wanted to show him the cover. On the top was a basketball player, and then there was some pop star, and then there was some other guy who was doing something else really stupid. And I looked at this and I said, look what's happening around the world. There's refugees, there's wars, there's things happening that we need to know in order to look at life. And what are we doing? We're reading comics for adults, saying this is the truth. Television says, and over now to our reporter in Queens, well, here I am at it, and we think, oh, that. Basically, we're being brainwashed by the media, and we're brainwashed by television, and we're brainwashed by the movies. The movies brainwash us. Because if you look at a movie that comes out, for the most part, out of Hollywood, you're not just accepting the storyline, you're accepting everything that goes behind that. And my answer to these movies when I sit and look at them is I say to myself, what is this movie saying to me? What is the perspective in this movie? I watched a movie last night where everybody who, I won't mention the name of the movie, but everybody who wasn't American in this movie was a stereotype. And the Americans were coming in to sort out this very complex situation. And that, to me, is untruth. That's a lie. And that's art masquerading. That's a lie masquerading as art.
So that leads me into a question of talking about movies. When you're deciding what to do you consider the message overall, or did that ever shift for you? And maybe a step back first. At what point did it go from auditioning for roles to becoming offers where you're getting scripts arriving at your doorstep, so to speak?
Thank God I did a movie called Miller's Crossing for the Coen Brothers, and I didn't have to audition after that.
Did you audition for that one?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
Myself and Marcia Gay Harden auditioned for that, and we both got the parts. And thank God I was taken out of the audition process, because it's hell.
It's terrible.
It's awful. You go in there and you're one. I know this girl who's a makeup girl, and we joke because her nickname is 538. And the reason she got the name 538 was because she went for an audition of a touring musical, and she was the 538th person to audition for the role. And she said, once I heard my number, I stopped. I gave it up, because I just realized, auditioning was not... Look, the way I look at it is this. If Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, you name all the people that... If they had to audition for the roles they get, they probably wouldn't get them.
They probably wouldn't, right? Because it's a numbers game, even if you're the best actor in the world.
And just because you're great at an audition doesn't mean you're going to give a good performance, and vice versa. It's a process where it's a bit like speed dating. Or this Tinder thing where you look and say, no, he looks kind of cute, I'll give him a call. It's a bit like that, because there's people coming in one after the other. How do you judge in 3 minutes whether somebody is...
And it's so different than what you're actually going to do on the day.
Of course.
You're in this sterilized room with like 1 or 2 people behind a camera, and then on the day you're, depending on the movie. It's just it's such an odd test for what the actual process is going to be.
Absolutely.
I'm already getting the sign that we're almost out of time.
Oh, yeah.
Which is nuts, and we didn't get into some of my, but maybe I can ask quick fire a couple of specific projects. Well, I was curious, what was it like with the Coen Brothers, with Miller's Crossing?
They were absolutely fascinating.
Are they
Because-
both like in tandem, like doing the whole thing?
They're almost like they're the same person. They'll finish each other's sentences, but what's remarkable is that they have the same vision. And
that they've kept it for so many years.
you know, you have to say this, that sometimes a gift is just a gift, and some people are just gifted. Like a guy who can build a beautiful building is gifted. People who can put together a beautiful script, direct it, put it out there, it's a gift. You can't teach somebody how to do that. You just can't. They were meticulous. Cut, you said that instead of and. Can we go again?
Oh yeah. There was no messing with their script.
No.
Yeah.
And there was a sense of, although it was a relaxed set, it wasn't really relaxed, because you were very aware that there was a very serious intent to each scene. And so you'd know that you did okay when they'd go.
Yep.
Two of them together.
Well,
You say, well, I got two heads going at the same time, so
right.
we're okay. Yeah.
I just watched recently Dead Man, the
Yeah.
Jim Jarmusch, and you come in for one scene, a very pivotal moment, where you catch your lady, you get the sense that there was some sort of breakup, and then you're coming back to bring her a present, and she's in bed with another guy. Now, what's that like when, as opposed to Miller's Crossing, when you're in almost every scene, and then a movie like Dead Man, when you show up, I assume it's like one day of shooting probably, and you just come in and you do this scene. How do you prepare for something like that?
Well, it's much more difficult to play a small part than it is to play a part every day.
It's like you want to add a limp. You want to like.
You want to add a
have
limp, and you want to embroider. So my version of the limp in that scene was the present. I said, I can't just walk in the door. I want to make her in the bed become something more. So what if this guy starts off on his horse in Arizona? It's a bit like the limp. And just before he goes into the thing, he buys her flowers. And he comes up the stairs full of hope, and he opens the door, and there she is in bed with Johnny Depp. What do you do? Well, in bed with Johnny Depp. So then those flowers become something else. Those flowers become pathetic. The present loses its meaning. And all he can do is take out the gun to shoot his girlfriend, who gets in the way of Johnny Depp and shoots her instead.
Yeah.
And so it's much more difficult to do one scene.
Well, is it? I mean, but you're talking about like having a moment before, right? Like the fact you come in with this energy, and then it gets interrupted by this new reality that you're faced with. And to me, that's why I went back and watched the one scene in thinking about this evening, and I was amazed at how shorter it was than I realized when it first happened, because it really does, when you come in, there's such an event that happens in that first moment. And I thought that was just a nice lesson to learn.
I talked to Jim Jarmusch, who's a brilliant director as well. I said, I want this to be a good guy coming in. I don't get much time to say he's a good guy, but I want him to have a look on his face of, I'm home to see the woman I love. And what does that do to your face when you open the door and see her in bed with somebody else? And then they cut to them in the bed. But they're not bad people either. They're good people caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. So, So when I see a small part, a performer who comes on and who has a couple of lines and he gives it a life, so that you in the audience are saying, I could follow that guy off into another play or into another movie. That guy's done a good job.
Wow, yeah. Well, I think you did that.
Thank you.
I guess we should wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thank you, Gabriel, for talking with me.
Thank you, Will.
On behalf of Lonnie Price and Matt Cowart, we'd like to thank Godfrey Pelayo, Jordana Pacumpi, sorry, Tom Dunn, Jillian Campbell, and the staff of the David Rubenstein Atrium. Thanks for coming out tonight.
And don't forget, Bridge of Spies, Steven Spielberg,
Yeah.
Will Rogers.
Oh, thanks, Gabriel. And you're in. Yeah. Thank you.